Hi everybody, if you like this video, you can like, subscribe, or comment on my channel, and if you want to support me through my Patreon account, check my link out in the description below. So today I wanted to talk about some book recommendations for some Hindu Indian mythology, some Hindu holy books. Just like we have, say Christians, or not we, but say Christians, for example, we have the Bible. Well, Hindus have a lot of different holy books. They have the Vedas, and there's multiple Vedas. They have the Upanishads, the Puranas, the Mahabharata, the Ramayana, which are more epics. They're giant spiritual stories. So they have a lot of different holy books. And any good holy book can speak to you at many different levels, and it moves out of many different levels of reality. And especially these Hindu Indian epics, they move through many different planes of consciousness. For example, beings in the story might be incarnations of gods or goddesses or other sages. So these beings are, you could see from the outside perspective where they are living multiple, they're living in this lifetime, but they're living this incarnation for a certain reason, and they came from a certain place and incarnated from whatever they were in their past life. And that is how normal life is going on all the time, but it's just we don't realize that. But they're looking at it from an outside perspective where, say I use myself for an example, say I was an incarnation, and I was reincarnating, and in my past life I was some kind of yoga instructor in the Middle East, and I got prosecuted for it because you can't do that kind of stuff in Muslim countries. And so in my next life I was taking birth in the United States so I could instruct yoga and live out that karma since I couldn't do it before, or whatever. Or another example from these stories would be, say there was some kind of god or demigod in heaven, and somebody was praying for their help because there were demons on earth, so they decide to take birth on earth to help vanquish these demons in an incarnation. And while they're in it, it's just like anybody taking birth. They don't know why they're there or why they came into it, unless somebody that has that insight or that vision tells them, some kind of holy being that can perceive that. But that's just an example. So anyway, we'll get into the books, and I'll have links for all of them in the description. So the first book is the Ramayana, and it's the story of Ram. And this happened in the Treta Yuga. So there's 4 yugas in Indian mythology. There's the Sat Yuga, the Treta Yuga, the Dwapara Yuga, and the Kali Yuga, which is the one we're in now. The Sat Yuga is the first one, and it's the most pure, and it lasts about 1,700,000 years, and they go in cycles. So the Treta Yuga is where Ram was at and where the Ramayana took place. This yuga is still extremely pure. The people and the beings are still extremely more pure than the Kali Yuga that we're in now, but there's some discord in it. It's not perfect. The Sat Yuga was, perfect, is 100% good. The Treta Yuga is only 75% good. So there's forces of evil or discord or disharmony, and there is war and battle still in this yuga. So the story of the Ramayana mainly takes place, they think, in India and around Sri Lanka and stuff like that. It's the story of Ram, who is an incarnation of God, of Vishnu, which is the supreme Lord in Hinduism. And Ram takes birth on earth, and the main plot of the Ramayana is that he's trying to save Sita, who's his wife, that has gotten kidnapped by a demon named Ravana. And there's a whole giant story that goes around that, and there's lots of very good spiritual insight and wisdom. And we have to remember, they were in a purer time, so their acts are very pure. The way they talk about things and behave is very pure and humble and respectful and this and that. So you learn a lot from it in the process. Hanuman, the monkey, comes out of the story of the Ramayana. He's the servant of Ram. So it's a very beautiful story, and it's pretty huge. I personally listened to it on Audible, and it was about 14 hours. And it really is great because it gets you an idea of like what Hinduism is talking about, like where they're coming from, like what their understanding is of how things are. So that's the Ramayana. Now there's also a book called the Mahabharata, which is bigger. I listened to that also on Audible. Actually, I'm not finished yet, and that is 44 hours long. That's a huge spiritual epic about the Pandavas, which are a group of brothers, and that also can be used on so many different planes of consciousness. It talks about all the different, Hindu gods and demigods and humans and everything. The main deity in the Mahabharata is Krishna, who is the Supreme Personality of Godhead. So the Supreme Personality of God, of the universe. And he's, takes birth already fully enlightened and comes, he says comes to whenever there's discord in the world to establish religion and wipe out demonic entities and stuff like that. So the Mahabharata's, it's an amazing story. It's huge. It has so much spiritual wisdom and insight contained in it. It takes place in the following yuga, the Dwapara yuga, and it is, so there's more discord. So there's only 50% good and basically 50% evil. So forces are about equal in this yuga. It's amazing, and it's definitely worth checking out. And then what comes inside of here, the greatest piece that many people say of Indian wisdom and spiritual knowledge is the Bhagavad Gita, which comes out of the Mahabharata. It's a short section of it. It's Krishna, God, speaking to Arjuna, a great warrior on this battlefield before the giant war, which is going to usher in the Kali Yuga, which is the yuga that we are in now. So this happened about, mythology states that it happened about 3,000, a little over 3,000 BC, so about 5,000 years ago. And the Bhagavad Gita, it means the song of the Lord. So it's God speaking on this battlefield. And like I said, there's a lot of different stuff going on. Like Arjuna is an incarnation of a rishi, a spiritual holy being that came down to earth to fulfill this purpose. And Krishna was his brother, was another rishi that also came down now as Krishna. And there's many other, there's a lot of that going on. So you got to remember they're operating at these different levels, and they really believe, they speak over and over in the Mahabharata, the different characters, about how nothing happens outside of the will of divine providence. Like, what can men do? And they're still very holy in this yuga. They're very respectful to their elders. They never break their vows. People really respect these different principles. So it's an amazing story. And what's happening is that they're at this battlefield, and Arjuna, who's a great warrior but also a great spiritual being in his own right, as I said, he was the rishi, and he's lived in the forest for 13 years and did all kinds of asceticism and meditation and yoga, and he's lived with the gods, and so he's a very wise and holy being in his own right. So he gets, he's about to fight his family because of this war that's taking place that they feel is ordained. He's about to fight his cousins and his teachers and his grandfather, and he knows everyone's going to get killed because Krishna already said that, and Krishna knows everything. And so he gets really sad right before the battle. He's like, I can't understand how this makes any sense. And he raises a lot of good points because he's a very wise being in his own right. He's like, what's the point of gaining the whole world but killing everybody? What's the point of enjoying this? Well, how can I enjoy any fame or wealth, slaughtering my family in the process? Like, what's the point of this? Isn't this leads to hell, And he has very good, points that most people would agree with. And be like, why are we doing this? And then Krishna speaking, God speaking, has to take this one level further. And that's how the Bhagavad Gita starts, is he starts explaining to him. He's like cast off this petty weakness of heart and fight, and he starts off by saying, you and none of all these other men on this battlefield, none of you die. You're all souls. You've all taken birth many times. You've always been, and you've always will be. And he says, a wise man laments neither for the living nor for the dead, because nobody really dies. And he says, him who thinks himself the slayer, so the killer, or the slain, that which is killed, is not in knowledge. For the self neither slays nor is slain. And then, he goes on. That's how it starts. And he goes on to speak about how the self, the soul of all beings, is indestructible, eternal, everywhere, can't be burned by fire, blown by the wind, can't be wet by water, it's all pervading and lives on forever, that it's in everything. He goes on to say, I am the taste of water, etc. And basically what Krishna is saying is he's teaching about bhakti yoga, about loving devotion towards God. And he tells Arjuna, you're compelled to act by the forces of nature anyway. And basically he's saying that in the world, people are going to act, and we're going to do things, not to worry about doing or not doing, unless you're an ascetic, unless you're someone that lives in a cave and meditates, but do the things you do as an offering to God, or in other words, do them without attachment to the fruits of your labor. Because most things we do solely because of attachment to the fruits of the labor. And that's what creates more karma and renewed birth and death. So Krishna is talking about give up the results of your activities, such as in the war. He's telling Arjuna, just fight. Don't worry about the results or what you're doing. You do this because this is your duty and this is your part in the play. And furthermore, nobody's ever hurt anyway. And they have a crazy understanding of things in Hinduism, because they state over and over again is that the beings that get killed, they know that they're going to probably go up to heavens and holy places. And if you get killed by a god or a holy being, then even more so better for your next rebirth and where you go next. So they have a different understanding of birth and death, is basically what I'm trying to say. And then, so the Bhagavad Gita has many, many, many commentaries by many different people. The two that I've read are by Swami A.C. Bhaktivedanta Prabhupada, who is the founder of the Krishna Consciousness Society. He found that about in the 1960s sometime. He came to the United States when he was about 70 years old with no money or anything, just a bunch of books. There's a movie on him too, I could put the link in here. But he started chanting Hare Krishna, and that was the Hare Krishna movement. People used to, there's comedians that make jokes about it. They used to speak at the airports and everything, trying to get people initiated. And it became a worldwide movement, and he was a servant of Krishna. So he did huge commentaries on all these holy books, and he did a huge commentary on the Bhagavad Gita. So it has all the verses and all of his commentary, and it's like 800 pages, or I guess a little less, about 750 pages. And it has the original text in Sanskrit, and then translated into Indian, and then word for word Indian to English, and then it has it fully in English. So you can see where he's getting, the words out of it from. It's a huge, extremely scholarly translation. You can learn a ton from it. He's a very great being. Now, you have to be a little careful with it, because he is very biased and opinionated in some parts, such as that he thinks the only way that you can get free is by chanting Hare Krishna. He also thinks that the individual soul ultimately is not God itself, is not the self itself, but that it is an eternal servitor of God, that it's equal in quality but not in quantity. he thinks so there's some things he's very opinionated about. Just one more example. He thinks that that the other stars we see in the sky aren't suns, but that they're other moons, because that's how he interprets a certain reading. So you got to be a little careful with some of it, but it's huge and there's a lot of wisdom in it. And you know that he was doing it out of, his love for God and his service to God. So I've read that tons of times. That was the first holy book I really read when I got into recovery from drugs and alcohol. And it's an amazing book. Now, the second commentary that I've read, that I'm going to put in the links, is by Swami Satchitananda, who also came to the United States in the 1900s. He was the one that opened up the starting speech at the Woodstock Festival. He started a town called Yogaville on the East Coast, which teaches something, he's passed away now, called integral yoga, which is a combination of the yogas of Bhakti Yoga, Jnana Yoga, Karma Yoga, Raja Yoga. So basically work, devotion, meditation, love. Wisdom, Jnana Yoga. And his commentaries are very beautiful too. He does them on the Yoga Sutras, he does it on the Bhagavad Gita, which is what we're talking about here. It's a lot shorter than this other one, than the Swami Prabhupada one. It's also amazing though. It's a really, really good commentary. It's a lot more simple, a lot less scholarly, probably a little bit easier to understand most of it. Although the larger one gives you more of an idea into Hindu mythology and stuff than the Swami Satchitananda version. So that, I'm going to put links for all these. That's all that I have for today. Like I said, these in themselves are some pretty huge undertakings if you care to look into any of them. But they're really worth it. I mean, the payoffs are great. If you want, it would probably be a better idea to start reading a version of the Bhagavad Gita and then afterward move into the larger Mahabharata or the Ramayana. If you have any questions about anything that I talked about here, just leave a note in the comments and I'll respond. Thanks.